I still remember the exact moment my daughter said those words to me. It was the night of her wedding. The reception was over, the flowers had wilted a little, and the fairy lights outside the venue were being taken down one by one. I was sitting alone at a table in the corner, still in my mother of the bride dress, this dusty rose color she had picked out for me herself. My feet ached from standing all day. My heart was so full I could barely breathe. I had just watched my little girl dance her first dance as a married woman. I had watched her father, my ex-husband, walk her down the aisle and then slip back to his seat beside his new wife like none of it mattered much to him. I had watched Melissa, my daughter, laugh and glow and be so beautiful that I cried twice before the ceremony even started. And then she came to find me. Right there at that corner table, she bent down, took my hand in hers, and she said something to me that I have carried with me every single day since. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she loved me. What she said quietly, almost like she was trying to get it over with, was, "Mom, I think it would be better if you gave us some space for a while. Marcus and I need time to just be us." And then she kissed me on the cheek. And she walked away. I sat there for a long time after that. The cleaning crew started moving around me. Someone collected the centerpieces. A young woman in a black apron asked me if I needed a glass of water. I had just spent $62,000 on that wedding. But that's not actually the part that broke my heart. My name is Carol. I'm 61 years old, and I live alone now in the house I've owned for almost 30 years in a small suburb of Columbus, Ohio. It's a nice house, not big but mine. I've got a kitchen garden out back, a sunroom I never use as much as I should, and a hallway lined with photographs that span the entire life of a family that doesn't quite exist anymore the way it did in those pictures. I grew up the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family. My father worked at a plant most of his life, and my mother cleaned houses for other people. They loved us, but money was always tight, and I learned very early that love and sacrifice were basically the same word. I got married at 24 to a man named Ray. He was charming and funny when we met, and for the first few years we were genuinely happy. We bought the house. We had Melissa. We had a dog named Biscuit. We went on small vacations and came home with photographs and stories, and I truly believed that this was going to be my whole life. A simple, ordinary, wonderful life. But Ray had a restlessness to him that I never fully understood. When Melissa was 7, he told me he wasn't happy. When she was 8, he started coming home late. When she was 9, he asked for a divorce. I was 34 years old with a 9-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a part-time job at the school district that paid me just enough to feel like I was surviving. I don't say any of this to make myself sound like a martyr. I say it because it's important you understand what the next 20-odd years looked like, what I built. Melissa was, from the very beginning, an extraordinary person to love. She was curious and funny and deeply sensitive in a way that sometimes scared me. Like she felt everything twice as much as the rest of us. She cried when birds flew into our windows. She wrote little apology notes to her stuffed animals if she accidentally knocked them off the bed. She carried a small notebook everywhere she went so she could write down things she didn't want to forget. After Ray left, she got quieter for a while. That broke me more than the divorce itself. Watching my little girl try to understand something that even I didn't understand. I remember one evening, she was maybe 10, and she came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and said very matter-of-factly, "Mom, do you think Daddy left because of something I did?" I turned off the stove. I sat down on the kitchen floor right there, and I pulled her into my lap, this long-legged, serious little girl, and I held her until she stopped worrying. I told her that her father's choices had nothing to do with her, that she was the best thing I had ever made, that I would never leave, that she would always have me, and I meant every single word. I worked 2 jobs through most of Melissa's middle school years. During the day I worked at the school district in the administrative office. On evenings and weekends I did bookkeeping for small local businesses, 3 of them at one point. I learned to sleep less and spend less and stretch everything further than I ever thought possible. I saved for her college fund in an account I never touched, even when I really needed to. I drove a car with a cracked dashboard until it finally died the year she graduated high school, because every month I paid for it instead of replacing it was a month I added something to her future. I said no to trips with friends. I said no to renovating the kitchen. I said no to myself again and again because saying yes to her felt like the most important thing I could do with my life. And Melissa flourished. She got into a good university on a partial scholarship. She studied communications, made friends, grew into someone warm and sharp and full of life. She called me every Sunday without fail for 4 years. She came home for holidays and always brought little gifts. A candle she thought I'd like, a book she wanted me to read, a photo she printed out and framed. I was so proud of her I sometimes had to look away. It sounds strange, but her success felt almost too bright to look at directly. Like I'd been in a dark room for so long that the light of her thriving stung my eyes a little. We were close. Real close. The kind of close that comes from it being just the two of you for most of your lives, sharing everything, the worry and the laughter and the small rituals that nobody else would understand. She knew that I always burned the first pancake on purpose, so the second one would come out perfect. I knew she could only fall asleep if she'd read at least a few pages of something first. We knew each other the way only two people who have lived inside the same quiet life can know each other. And then she met Marcus. She was 26 when they started dating. He was 30, worked in finance, drove a very clean car, and had the kind of confident manner that makes some people feel immediately at ease and makes others feel immediately on guard. I wanted to feel at ease. I tried. He was polite to me. That's probably the most honest way I can describe it. Polite. He remembered to say hello and goodbye. He answered questions directly. He shook my hand the first time we met, which struck me as slightly formal for meeting your girlfriend's mother, but I told myself I was being unfair. Melissa was happy. That mattered more than anything else. They dated for 2 years before he proposed, and when she called to tell me, she was crying from joy and talking so fast I could barely keep up. I cried too. I told her I was so happy for her. And I genuinely was. The engagement party was at Marcus's parents' home in Westerville. They had a beautiful house, the kind with a long driveway and a landscaped yard and a kitchen that had clearly been professionally renovated. His mother, Diane, was gracious and well-dressed and subtly made it clear in every interaction that she had very specific ideas about how the wedding should look. I remember standing in that kitchen during the party, helping myself to a glass of sparkling water, and overhearing Diane tell another guest that she just hoped Carol wouldn't try to make this smaller than it deserved to be. She didn't know I was behind her. I don't think she would have said it differently even if she had. Melissa came to me a few weeks later. We were sitting at my kitchen table the way we had 1,000 times before, and she said, "Mom, Marcus and I have been talking about the wedding, and we want something really beautiful. We've already started looking at venues." She was 26 when they started dating. He was 30, worked in finance, drove a very clean car, and had the kind of confident manner that makes some people feel immediately at ease and makes others feel immediately on guard. I wanted to feel at ease. I tried. He was polite to me. That's probably the most honest way I can describe it. Polite. He remembered to say hello and goodbye. He answered questions directly. He shook my hand the first time we met, which struck me as slightly formal for meeting your girlfriend's mother, but I told myself I was being unfair. Melissa was happy. That mattered more than anything else. They dated for 2 years before he proposed, and when she called to tell me, she was crying from joy and talking so fast I could barely keep up. I cried too. I told her I was so happy for her. And I genuinely was. The engagement party was at Marcus's parents' home in Westerville. They had a beautiful house, the kind with a long driveway and a landscaped yard and a kitchen that had clearly been professionally renovated. His mother, Diane, was gracious and well-dressed and subtly made it clear in every interaction that she had very specific ideas about how the wedding should look. I remember standing in that kitchen during the party, helping myself to a glass of sparkling water, and overhearing Diane tell another guest that she just hoped Carol wouldn't try to make this smaller than it deserved to be. She didn't know I was behind her. I don't think she would have said it differently even if she had. Melissa came to me a few weeks later. We were sitting at my kitchen table the way we had 1,000 times before, and she said, "Mom, Marcus and I have been talking about the wedding, and we want something really beautiful. We've already started looking at venues." She showed me the venues on her laptop. They were stunning. They were also not cheap. "What does Marcus's family think about costs?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "They're going to contribute. But his dad just had some business issues, and they can't do as much as they thought. And you've always said you wanted to give me the wedding you never had." I had said that years ago, when she was maybe 16 and we were watching some romantic movie together on the couch. "How much are we talking, sweetheart?" She showed me the estimate. $62,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at that number on the screen and I felt the weight of it settle into my chest like something solid. I want to help you, I told her. And I meant it. I did want to help her. But I also want to be honest about something I felt in that moment but didn't say. I felt a small quiet alarm go off somewhere deep inside me. Not about the money itself. About the way she looked at me when she said it, like the answer was already decided, and this was just the conversation that confirmed it. I said yes. I started pulling together everything I had: savings, a small retirement account I'd been building for years, a CD I'd been reluctant to touch. I didn't ask Marcus's family for their contribution in writing. I didn't draw up any kind of agreement. It didn't occur to me to do those things because I was her mother, and you don't negotiate with your child about love. That was probably my first real mistake. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The wedding planning lasted 18 months. And in those 18 months, something started to shift in my relationship with Melissa, so gradually that I almost didn't notice it was happening. It started small. Phone calls that used to happen every Sunday started becoming every other Sunday. And then whenever she had time. When we did talk, more and more of the conversation was about the wedding, the seating chart, the florist, the caterer's menu tasting, and less about us, about her life, about how she was actually feeling. I told myself this was normal. Planning a wedding is stressful. She was also working full-time. I shouldn't take up too much of her time. But then there were the decisions I was left out of. I found out about the wedding cake flavor by overhearing Melissa mention it to a friend on the phone. I had assumed we'd choose it together. I'd been talking about going to a bakery tasting with her for months. When I gently brought it up, she said, "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. Diane and I went together because she had a connection there. I meant to tell you. The bridesmaids' dresses were chosen without me. The reception playlist was put together with Marcus's sister's input, not mine. The rehearsal dinner, which I was also partially funding, was organized almost entirely by Diane, who seemed to have quietly installed herself as the primary decision-maker while I was still writing the checks. Each of these things alone was small. Together, they were a pattern I was doing my best not to see. What troubled me most wasn't being left out of decisions. It was the way Melissa responded when I brought up my feelings. She would get very still and quiet, and then she'd say something like, "Mom, you're making this about you." Or, "This is exactly what Marcus said would happen." And that phrase, "Marcus said," started appearing more and more. Marcus said I was too sensitive. Marcus said I needed to learn to let go. Marcus said it would be healthier for Melissa if she created some distance. I had never had a single serious conflict with my daughter in 28 years. And suddenly her husband-to-be was framing me as a problem to be managed. I kept quiet. I kept paying. I told myself that after the wedding, things would settle. That Melissa was under pressure, and this was temporary. That I just needed to be patient and supportive, and not take up too much space. I should have spoken sooner. I know that now. The wedding itself was beautiful. I want to say that plainly because it was. The venue was a restored farmhouse about 40 minutes outside the city, with string lights strung through old oak trees and wildflowers on every table. Melissa was radiant in a way that made everyone in the room a little breathless. When she walked down the aisle and caught my eye and smiled, I felt something so fierce and tender move through me that I had to press my lips together to keep from crying out loud. I was proud. I was grateful. I was so full of love for this person I had raised and worried over and devoted myself to for her entire life. And I was also, and I didn't fully understand this until later, already grieving something. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the back with some of Ray's extended family, and a few of Melissa and Marcus's college friends. Not at the parents' table. When I looked over at the parents' table, it was Marcus's parents, his grandparents, his aunt and uncle, and Ray, my ex-husband, and his wife. I had paid for $62,000 worth of this wedding. And I was seated at the back with people I barely knew. I said nothing. I smiled through dinner. I danced when the music invited it. I gave a toast that I'd been working on for 3 weeks, and people laughed in the right places and a few people cried, and Melissa hugged me afterward and said it was perfect. It was only later, when the evening was winding down and I was sitting at that corner table where she eventually found me, that I allowed myself to feel any of it. And then she said what she said. "Mom, I think it would be better if you gave us some space for a while. Marcus and I need time to just be us." I asked her very quietly what she meant by space. She said she didn't want to get into it that night. She said we'd talk. She said she loved me. But in the weeks that followed, we'd talk never happened. She went on her honeymoon. She came back. I texted and got short replies. I called and she didn't always answer. When she did, she sounded distant in a way that was entirely new, like she was talking to someone she was a little tired of, not someone she loved. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the wedding, I called her during my lunch break and she picked up and said, "Mom, is something wrong? Because I'm kind of in the middle of something." And something in her voice, something I couldn't quite name but recognized the way you recognize a change in weather before you can see the clouds, told me that the distance she had asked for at the reception wasn't temporary. I did something I'm not entirely proud of then. I drove to her neighborhood and sat in my car outside her building. I wasn't going to go in. I don't know. I needed to be close to something that was hers. That's when I saw Diane's car parked outside. Diane visited Melissa that day. They spent 2.5 hours inside. I know because I sat there and waited, telling myself I was going to leave in 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. I drove home and I sat in my sunroom until it was dark outside. And I started putting things together, things I'd been too willing to not see. The seating arrangement. The wedding decisions made without me. The way Marcus framed me as the difficult one. The fact that Diane, who had contributed almost nothing financially to the wedding, had been treated as the primary family while I, who had given everything I had, was being asked to disappear. I didn't cry that night. I felt something colder and quieter than tears. I felt the slow, awful understanding of someone who has finally let themselves see what has been true for a while. 2 months after the wedding, Melissa agreed to meet me for coffee. She arrived 7 minutes late, which she never used to do, and she sat across from me in a way that felt careful, like she had rehearsed this or been coached. I had decided I wasn't going to be accusatory. I wasn't going to make her defend Marcus or feel attacked. I just wanted to talk to my daughter. I told her that I missed her. I told her that the distance between us was hurting me, and that I didn't fully understand what I had done to deserve it. I told her that I had given everything I had to her wedding, not because I wanted anything back, but because I loved her, and that it had been painful to feel so pushed aside. She listened, and then she said something I've turned over in my mind probably 1,000 times since. She said, "Mom, you have to understand that Marcus and I are building a life together, and that means I have to make choices about who I let into that life. And honestly, you've always had a really hard time with boundaries." Boundaries. I thought about all the times I had quietly bitten my tongue and written the check and said, "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart." I thought about driving an old car for years so she could have a college fund. I thought about the nights I'd worked at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock doing bookkeeping so I could pay for things she needed. I thought about the toast I had given at her wedding, and how I had taken 3 weeks to write it so it would be exactly right. And I thought, is that what a person with no boundaries looks like? I asked her gently, whether this was something she felt on her own or whether Marcus had used that word first. She went very quiet, and the look on her face, not angry, not defensive, but something more like caught, told me more than her answer did. She said, "Marcus cares about my well-being. He helps me see things I can't always see myself." I said, "And what has he helped you see about me?" She looked out the window. She said, "That maybe you've made me feel guilty for having my own life. That you've used money to keep me close." I don't think I'd ever been struck mute by something before. But I was then. I sat there and looked at her, this person who was half my own heart walking around in the world, and I thought, he has convinced her that my love is a manipulation. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said very quietly, "Melissa, I have never used money to control you. I gave you everything I had because you are my daughter and I love you, and that's the only reason." She said she believed I believed that. I drove home without being able to tell you anything about the drive. In the months that followed, I did a lot of sitting still and thinking hard. I have a therapist now, a woman named Dr. Rhodes, who has helped me understand something important. That what I experienced has a name. It's called the mom-in-law squeeze. It's the way a controlling partner will subtly, systematically, work to loosen a child's attachment to their parents, particularly a devoted mother, by framing that devotion as toxicity, as enmeshment, as a wound that needs to be healed by distance. I won't tell you I've fully made peace with it because that would be a lie. Some days I pick up my phone and I start to text Melissa and then I put it down again because I don't know what to say that won't somehow be used against me. Some days I walk past the photographs in my hallway and I have to keep moving because if I stop, something in my chest pulls so hard I feel it physically. But I have also gotten to something that feels like clarity, even if it's a painful kind. Here is what I've come to understand. The money was never supposed to be a bond. It was just love made practical. I grew up in a family where love was shown through sacrifice and provision, and I carried that into motherhood without ever questioning whether it was the right language to use, or whether the person I loved was fluent in it. Melissa may not have understood, in the full weight of it, what it cost me to give her what I gave her. Not because she didn't love me, I still believe she loves me, but because she had never seen the accounting. I had protected her from knowing how tight things were. I had made sacrifice look effortless so she wouldn't worry. And in doing so, I had made it possible for someone else to come along and say, "Your mother didn't sacrifice for you. She invested in you so she could hold the receipt." That is one of the hardest realizations I've had to sit with. The other is this. Marcus is not entirely wrong that I had a hard time letting go. Not in the manipulative way he framed it, but in the human way. The honest way. She had been my whole life for so long. Learning to be someone whose child didn't need her the same way, learning to take up space in my own life again, not just in hers, was something I hadn't done the work on. I was so focused on her growing that I had quietly forgotten to keep growing myself. That's on me. And I'm working on it. About 8 months after the wedding, I wrote Melissa a letter. Not an email, a real letter on paper in my own handwriting. I've always thought there's something more permanent and more honest about handwriting. You can't edit it as easily. Stays closer to what you actually feel. I told her that I loved her without conditions and without a ledger. I told her that I was not going anywhere, and that my door, the same door she had walked out of and walked back into 100 times over her whole life, would always be open to her. But I also told her for the first time that I had feelings that mattered. That I had been hurt by the way things had gone, and that I needed her to know that, not to make her feel guilty, but because pretending I wasn't hurt would be dishonest. And dishonesty had never been something we did to each other. I told her that I would give her the space she asked for. But that space was not the same as silence, and I hope she understood the difference. I mailed the letter and I didn't wait for a response. That was deliberate. I wasn't writing to prompt a reply. I was writing to say something true, and then let it be true without needing anything back from it immediately. After I mailed that letter, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made an appointment to see a financial advisor. Not because I was in financial trouble, I wasn't quite, but because for the first time in decades I needed to think about my money as mine. Not as a future gift or a sacrifice in progress. Mine. For my life. For my future. I started using that sunroom I never used. I bought good plants for it. A big fiddle leaf fig, some trailing pothos, a fern I almost killed twice before I figured out it needed humidity. I started going for walks in the morning before work. I reconnected with a friend from college I hadn't seen in 6 years. I learned, slowly and imperfectly, to fill the hours that used to belong entirely to Melissa's orbit with things that were just mine. And I stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. That sounds simple. It was not. I want to say something to anyone listening who recognizes something of themselves in this story. Setting a boundary doesn't mean closing your heart. It means deciding what you will and won't accept, not out of anger but out of self-respect. The two things can exist at the same time. You can love someone completely and still refuse to disappear for them. I won't tell you I've become someone different. I haven't. I'm still the woman who saves the first pancake. I still sleep on one side of a bed that's too big for one person. I still have photographs in the hallway that I walk past and feel things about. But I am not waiting for someone else's life to begin so that mine can resume. It is now almost 2 years since Melissa's wedding. We are in contact. Carefully, tentatively, the way you walk on ice you're not sure has frozen all the way through. She texted me on my birthday and called on Christmas. Last spring she came by the house alone, while Marcus was traveling for work, and we sat in the sunroom together and drank tea and talked about small things. Her job, my garden, a book we'd both happened to read. We did not talk about what happened. Not yet. I don't know if we ever will in the full and honest way I'd hoped for. But she came. She sat with me. She stayed for 2 hours, and when she left she hugged me at the door and held on for just a moment longer than she had to. I stood on my porch and watched her car pull out of the driveway, and I thought, there is still something here. It's not what it was. Maybe it will never be what it was. But there is still something, and I am going to take care of it the way I take care of those plants in the sunroom. Carefully, without smothering, with enough light and enough room. I've learned that love between parents and children is not a fixed thing. It changes shape with every season of life. The love I had with Melissa when she was 9 years old and sitting in my lap on the kitchen floor, that kind of love doesn't exist in quite the same form anymore, and maybe it shouldn't. She is a grown woman with her own life and her own home and her own marriage. What I'm learning to do is love the person she is now, not the child I'm grieving. That is hard work. But it is the most worthwhile work I've ever done. And here's what I want anyone to hear who might be in a version of this story. Whether you're the parent or the child, sacrifice is not the same as debt. Giving should not come with invisible strings, and if you find that your giving has been turned into evidence against you, that tells you something important about who is doing the turning. But also, the love you gave is not wasted even if it isn't seen. It still counts. It still mattered. It is still real. I gave my daughter the wedding she dreamed of because I loved her. What she did with that love afterward, that's her story to reckon with, not mine to be destroyed by. I am 61 years old. I have a house with a garden and a sunroom full of plants and a hallway of photographs and a life that is mine. I am going to be okay.